Hello and welcome to episode 176 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. On the show today, I'll be joined by my wife, Courtney. As we've mentioned in the past, Courtney has a disability, and last month she decided to navigate the parks for the first time in a wheelchair. We learned an awful lot about the different issues and benefits of renting a wheelchair from Disney for the parks. Before we get started, please make sure you like, comment, and are subscribed at the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. We have a lot of exciting things happening this summer, and we would love for you to be a part of it. Right now, let's welcome Courtney back to the show. Thanks for being here, Court.
Thanks so much for having me, Rick.
So the vast majority of this episode is going to be focused on wheelchairs in the theme parks at Walt Disney World. But of course, that means we're going to be talking about two of the most important topics we discuss on this podcast. That is accessibility and inclusion. And when it comes to disabilities and accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities, it is impossible right now not to address the changes in the DAS disability access system at Walt Disney World. Disney rolled out a new version of the DAS system on the 20th of last month, and we're going to give them an entire month to try to iron out any of the problems, to try to deal with some of the complaints from Disney guests. But needless to say, the first few weeks of this new DAS system have been horrible. I know a lot of people, and I'm not going to speak for any of them right now, but people are contemplating either not renewing their annual passes at Walt Disney World because the parks are just not accessible for them right now, or people who are drastically thinking about cutting down how many times they do visit the theme parks, and people changing their vacation plans based on the poor rollout of this system. It used to be that to qualify for a DAS pass, you spoke to a cast member in the theme parks. You could also have an appointment in advance, and you would tell them why you needed that particular disability accommodation. Now, there is a third party who makes that determination, and it is becoming glaringly obvious that Disney has just hired this third party as a way to deflect and reject people who previously would have qualified for disability access passes and blame it on that new third party. I know a lot of people will say, well, there were people who were abusing the system, and that might be true, it might not be true, but we are talking about people who qualified legitimately for a disability access pass, who now no longer qualify, or their disability access has changed in a way that makes it unaccessible for those people. Just one example would be, instead of people with digestive issues like IBS, who before would have a disability access pass, they could make a return time where they could come back and ride the ride and go through the lightning lane. Now they are asking those people to leave the queue, which is a pain for everybody involved, including other people in the queue, and then return to meet up with their party. Now, just think about somebody who is there at Walt Disney World by themselves, the solo traveler. How are they going to navigate this? That is just one example of how this is not an acceptable program by Disney. But I did say I want to give them an entire month, let them fix all of these problems, and hopefully come July, August, and some of those really, really busy times, Disney will have had this fixed, and everybody who qualified for a DAS pass before will still qualify for a DAS pass. And if you want to get rid of the people who are lying, get rid of the people who are lying. But this will not be acceptable unless everybody who legitimately qualified for a DAS pass without lying still qualifies for a DAS pass. Now, we're going to talk about other ways that Disney does try to make things more accessible for people, because there are still areas where Disney does excel in this situation. We just hope they continue to excel in the DAS Pass and go back to having things more like the way they were before May the 20th. You can rent ECVs, electric scooters, or wheelchairs at the 4 Walt Disney World theme parks. It is $12 a day to rent a wheelchair at one of the theme parks, and that number per day reduces the more days that you get a wheelchair. So when we recently went, Courtney got a wheelchair for 2 days. It cost us a total of $20. So first of all, Courtney, why don't you run through what was the process of actually picking up the wheelchair that first day when we were at Epcot?
Sure, and if we may back up just a little bit, and I can share a little bit of why I personally feel that I need some help with a mobility aid in navigating the parks. So in the past 4 years, I've been dealing with autoimmune disease and fibromyalgia to some extent. They are difficult to diagnose and to get to a very specific diagnosis, but I had increasing muscle pain, stiffness, joint pain, especially in my legs and feet, and it just makes it so much more difficult to walk around these theme parks all day and to have the energy to do multiple days. So one day really wipes me out and I'm so sore and in pain and really have no energy left for multiple days. So this time we thought we would try the wheelchair option. And it's great that Disney has it. They made it very easy. And the cast members were extremely accommodating, extremely nice, knowledgeable with what they were doing. So really you just go up to the area with the stroller/wheelchair rentals, and they give you a tag so that you can put it in the wheelchair so you know which wheelchair is yours for the day. They describe the process to you. You have the option to park the wheelchair at any point with stroller parking. You can stay in the wheelchair as much as you need and go through queues. There are some rides where you would need to transfer, or you can stay in the wheelchair for the ride. And so they were able to explain all of these things, and we had our receipt from the first day, which we could keep and then be able to rent the wheelchair again the next day just by presenting our receipt. So we paid the first day, got our wheelchair, returned it with no issue, and then the next day picked up a wheelchair again when we were ready. Again, no issue, smooth process, and were able to return it when we were done.
So one thing I wanted to address as we talk about the wheelchair process is Courtney will discuss what it's like to be the person who needs the wheelchair, and she'll have a lot more information over the course of this. But I do think it's sometimes important to talk about what to expect when you're the other person or one of the other people in the party, because I was now pushing Courtney on this wheelchair for the entire day at Epcot first, and then we did Magic Kingdom the second day. And those are some walking intensive parks. I think maybe it would have been a little easier, especially at Hollywood Studios, and maybe even at Animal Kingdom, but you definitely walk a ton when you are at Epcot and Magic Kingdom. I was prepared and expecting this to be something that was difficult upper body wise. I was thinking I was going to be pushing this wheelchair for 2 straight days and that I was going to get tired like I had just done a lot of bench presses. But it turns out it was more like a post-leg day kind of tired. And anybody who exercises knows that leg day, that next morning, can be tough. We ended up having a more chill weekend where we didn't get to Magic Kingdom the second day until the afternoon. but I definitely needed to sleep in that second day because it is a workout on your legs, especially if you're expecting it to be a workout on your upper body. So just be patient about that and know what to expect. You don't think you're going to be loading things onto the wheelchair. You're like, oh, I go through the parks. Maybe I have a park bag. Maybe I don't have a park bag. But I'm not going to be one of these people who loads up the wheelchair like people load up strollers for their kids. Well, guess what? Just like whenever you buy a new table, all of a sudden you fill it with things and you no longer have any table space. And you're like, what happened? Why did I buy this new table and I still don't have any space to do the things I want to do on the table? You end up doing that with the wheelchair as well. There are pockets. You end up putting your drinks into the pockets. You end up storing a few extra things. And you will do it no matter how much you think you're not going to do it. So just be prepared for those kind of things. That being said, I don't think there was a moment at Epcot that we had any problems with the wheelchair. We rode Frozen Ever After and Living with the Land. I think they were the only two rides that we experienced that day. Both of them were rides where you have to transfer from the wheelchair and get into the vehicle, except for the fact that if you want to wait for an accessible boat, you can do that at Living with the Land. So you have the choice of whether you want to transfer or whether you don't want to transfer. Courtney can walk, so she can easily transfer at some of these rides. It's not a situation where she's immobile. It is just an aid to her in her disabilities. She was able to transfer quite easily, but if you have somebody in your party who's not, just keep that in mind and always have those conversations with cast members. However, I will say every time we got into a queue and you had the wheelchair, they did ask, first thing, are you able to transfer?
Right. I mean, the cast members were absolutely on point, very well trained, you could tell. And again, just extremely accommodating, extremely helpful. And they had their places where they could put the wheelchair so that when you exited the ride, it was easily accessible for you to pick it up. They asked you right away and wanted to make sure what your needs were and could they accommodate you for that particular ride.
So the weekend we were there, Courtney was really focused on meeting characters and having some photo ops with characters. And that gives us another unique experience to share with you about having the wheelchair and trying to do the character meets. Most of them were very, very easy. We just were in very short lines because most characters on most days don't have lines as long as even the rides with the shortest lines. So it's usually pretty accessible there. I found that maybe when we were waiting for Jasmine in the Morocco Pavilion, it was kind of hard to move back and forth in the switchbacks. Also, there was a pass holder lounge at Restaurant Marrakesh in the Morocco Pavilion, and there were areas where you had to transfer, you had to get off of the wheelchair for us to, for example, get a seat. Now, you would have thought that people seeing that there's somebody in a wheelchair who needs a seat and there's an empty seat at the top of the stairs, that there would be people who would put two and two together and do the right thing. But we've talked about this a lot on the podcast and in vlogs lately, that the kindness of guests at the theme parks has been lacking lately, and nobody did make that offer to just go up the steps. We're talking like 3 steps to sit at that table so Courtney could sit at one at a lower level. but we made it work and we figured out how to do it. That was also a lifesaver because it was a very hot day, so we were able to sit in the pass holder lounge for a little bit. We waited, it said 20 minutes, but it ended up being way more than 20 minutes for the Anna and Elsa meet and greet. I would say that one was perfect, and we ran into no particular issues because of the wheelchair. There was plenty of room in the entire queue to maneuver, to go around corners. And then once we got to the point where Courtney was meeting Anna and Elsa, then I just sort of moved the wheelchair into the corner and she was able to take her pictures. Like I said, she was able to get out of the wheelchair and stand for short periods of time. But even if you're not able to do that, you could just literally pull the wheelchair right up to the characters in that situation. So I think Epcot was fairly accessible using the wheelchair. It's just, you really, really want to be prepared. If you're going to the back of World Showcase to the US Pavilion, then you're inevitably going the whole way around, or you're going half the way around and then cutting back. And that's over a mile of pushing somebody just right there, just to get around World Showcase is like 1.3 miles, I think.
Right, but the good thing too, when you think about it, is the friendship boats there. And I think sometimes we don't think about it. Also kind of depends on your timing. So you can go from that port of entry area and take the boat directly back to Morocco. And, that gets you back there quickly and, well, relatively quickly. And of course, a lot less walking. And again, the cast members are great. They know exactly what to do. So I was able to transfer out of the wheelchair, and they keep the wheelchairs inside so that they're secured on the boat. And then we wanted to sit in the back outside on the boat. So that worked out fine. But, the cast members, again, just communicate with you and be prepared to, communicate with them and, of course, follow the instructions that they have. So the wheelchair, needed to be inside in that specific instance.
That is a good point. We used the friendship boat to get back to the Morocco Pavilion, but I will say we had to wait for quite some time. Like, we just missed the previous boat. So you don't go really quickly when you take the friendship boats. I mean, sometimes you might luck into they're just about to leave and you can quickly just be like, hold on, can you fit one more? And then I find that can be a quick thing, but a lot of the time you might just want to suck it up and push the wheelchair around to the Morocco Pavilion, because making that timing work can be difficult, especially if you have a dining reservation or if you are trying to meet a character who only meets for a certain time throughout the day. Those things can be important to try to maneuver, and sometimes you can't just wait leisurely for a friendship boat. Returning the wheelchair was very easy at the end of the night. Courtney just took it up to the same place where we rented it. She showed them the receipt and they took it back. I know a lot of people have a tendency to just leave these wheelchairs in the parking lot to wheel out their family member or friend who was using the wheelchair, put them in the car, and then just say, what's Disney going to do about it? And leave them out there. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to make sure that we were being kind to cast members. And when we talk about accessibility, if a ride isn't accessible for somebody, maybe they can't transfer out of the wheelchair, or for whatever reason, there is a difficulty. And that includes with the disability access system, with those DAS passes. None of these things are the fault of the cast members. So try to make sure you're making their days easier, because the higher ups make the decisions and then underpay people to sit there and get the brunt of their anger about those changes. So just keep that in mind. But the next day we showed up to Magic Kingdom. Unfortunately, at Magic Kingdom, you don't get to pick up the wheelchair. until you are in Magic Kingdom, which I do think it would be beneficial if they had a way that you could pick up your wheelchair at the TTC, so that when you're taking the monorail or you're taking the ferry boat over to Magic Kingdom, that's a 45-minute proposition a lot of the time. Like, it will take me 45 minutes to get from my car to inside Magic Kingdom. And if you have somebody who struggles with mobility, that is a lot of time to be dealing with that. However, we got into the park, we showed them the receipt, we got the wheelchair right away. It was a very smooth situation. And I guess this is a little bit of a side note, but right when we got into Magic Kingdom, to the right of the entrance, Mulan was meeting, and she was meeting for like 5 minutes for the rest of the day. Why don't you talk a little bit about your interaction with Mulan? Because I know this was special.
All right, so I love character interactions, and sometimes they can be a little awkward, but I think that the characters know their stuff and they're prepared. And sometimes they already have something that they're going to tell you, a little story. For example, if you're wearing a celebrating your birthday button, they might say something to you already about how they celebrate birthdays in their world, or have a question about, what gift you want or something to that extent. So in this case with Mulan, I decided that I would start the conversation, and I was saying something to the effect of that, I really liked her being a strong warrior, and I wish that I could be a warrior physically in the way that she is, but, I really can't do that anymore. My body is different, and so maybe I'll just be a chronic illness warrior. And Mulan took this, and she was wonderful. And I may start to get choked up, so hopefully I won't, but anyway, it's fine. Either way. So she took this, and she said, I think something else about celebrating the birthday, but then she said, now, wait a minute. I don't want to brush past what you just said there. She said, I'm sure that you deal with things like advocating for yourself, with trying to take care of your body, and dealing with how different it is for you than how it used to be. You deal with a lot of different doctor's appointments and, a lot of differences there. And she said, those things are very brave and very courageous. And she said, I think that might make you more of a warrior than even me being a warrior for China.
And now I was dealing with getting the wheelchair out of the way and getting ready to take the pictures. So I had no idea any of this interaction happened until later in the day when Courtney told me about it. And I just thought that was another one of those reasons why we continue to go back to Disney. I mean, sometimes, I'm going to be honest, like, I'm wondering whether I want to re-up my annual pass come September when it expires because of some of the changes that are happening. And that's somebody who loves Disney as much as I love it. And some of these changes, especially with the DAS Pass system, have made me question if I want to keep giving the company my money. But then there are sometimes that situations like that happen, and regardless of what I end up deciding, it's going to be those memories that make the money that I already spent worthwhile. In the long run, Disney is peddling in nostalgia and memories, and that was one of those days where they made an incredible memory for Courtney. And when they made one for Courtney, of course, then that makes me happy because she had that experience. And those are the reasons why we love Disney. I think for the most part, Magic Kingdom was just as smooth as it was in Epcot. I do want to make note that if you have a wheelchair and you are riding It's a Small World, whether you are going to wait for a wheelchair accessible boat or not, they still put you on a special entrance. So if either A, you bought Lightning Lane, or B, you have a DAS Pass, don't waste your Lightning Lane or your DAS Pass on It's a Small World because you're going to go through a separate entrance anyway. First of all, don't ever waste your DAS Pass or your Lightning Lane on It's a Small World, but this is even more of a reason not to do that. When we got to the bottom of the ramp, they asked us if Courtney needed to use one of the handicap accessible boats. And I said to the cast member, well, to be honest, I don't think she needs it. I think she could transfer to another boat, but those boats are too constrictive for me, being 6'4". So would it be okay if we used one of the accessible boats? And she said, sure. And we just had to wait maybe about 5 to 10 minutes until the accessible boat arrived. And then the cast member was really good about putting blocks behind the wheels on the wheelchair so that it didn't shift too much when the boat was in motion around the ride. It was a very smooth experience. I think the other time that the wheelchair accessibility came into play was using the railroad. This was another time where we were given the option where Courtney could transfer. We could either fold up the wheelchair and put it in with us if we were going to get off at one of the other stations. We could have left the wheelchair there if we were just going to take a trip around the park and return to Main Street. Or, and this is the one that we ended up deciding because we wanted to see how the process would go, at the very front of the train, there is an accessible car where you can park a wheelchair and you just take it up a slightly smaller ramp. And this was a really great experience because we didn't have to smush the wheelchair next to us on a bench. You were able to stay seated in the wheelchair, keep it, because we only ended up taking it to Storybook Circus back there in the back of New Fantasyland. And this way we were able to keep the wheelchair on us, and you were still able to enjoy the ride without having this wheelchair kind of stuck on the bench with us.
Right. And once again, the cast members were fantastic. You know, no problem at all. Hey, we'll get the ramp for you. They know exactly what they're doing and making sure that you are safe and secure on the ride. And then whenever we were ready to disembark, the same thing.
So we're going to talk about two rides where the experience is very different if you are in a wheelchair. The first one, Haunted Mansion. Why don't you talk a little bit about this process?
So there was a cast member. I believe there are two cast members when you get in to the main parlor. And the one cast member gave, very, very good instructions about us keeping to the right-hand side, and explained that we would be the last to enter the stretching room and the last to leave the stretching room. And then as soon as we exited, again, there was a cast member who saw us immediately and, kept us to the right-hand side. So the main thing being thinking about the moving walkway. Are you able to safely move on a moving walkway? Are you comfortable doing that? Is there any issue that you have with being able to do that? And if you didn't, then, you were fine to get on the ride the same way that you normally would. But, again, they're keeping you to the side. They're making sure that you're answering these questions. And if you needed some other accommodation, I'm sure they would have another way. But we were able to transfer out of the wheelchair and get onto the ride through the moving walkway. And they help guide you back into the line. So even though they're kind of taking you out of line and saying, okay, we have this process where you'll be last to the stretching room, last out of the stretching room, answering these questions, but then they seamlessly guide you right back into the queue and you're able to load normally as anybody else would.
And then Pirates of the Caribbean is fairly similar to most of the other rides, except for at the end, we got to do something that I found kind of cool. Like, we go to these parks all the time and you never noticed people on wheelchairs and how they were handling it. And then we got to do something we've never done before, and it was kind of fun.
Yeah, so there's that big ramp That's a moving walkway that takes you up, back out to exit the ride. And it's just something we never thought of, but this was our first time. And the cast members, again, are very quick to notice, your needs. And they directed us to like where we picked up our wheelchair. Then they tell you directions to get to the elevator. And it's actually a cast member entrance slash exit. And you go up the elevator, and there's kind of a little side ramp that twists around the side. And then, that was kind of neat to see where we came up. And by the way, it was great timing, just so happened that fireworks were happening. So we were just able to be right there off to the side of Pirates and watch the fireworks.
And then we went and did the Enchanted Tiki Room and got a front row seat because that's where they put people in wheelchairs for the Enchanted Tiki Room. So we just explained a bunch of the positives about having a wheelchair in the Walt Disney World theme parks for a weekend. Would you say there are any negatives that you noticed, any times that accessibility was a little more of a challenge?
Yeah, so just here and there, you might have something uneven, like a cobblestone or something. And the biggest place you really have to be careful would be out on Main Street with the trolley tracks. So that was difficult to, cross over or make sure that the wheels don't get stuck. And then you're just trying to look for curbs or any ramps, and it's not a hard curb. So sometimes you have to look and navigate, and if it's a little too crowded with people, that can be a little bit more difficult. And since we're people who have not used strollers in the parks, that was a little new to us, but maybe people who do use strollers are already aware. The other place I would say was with some of the character meet and greets when you were leaving, and there was a set of, double doors that you push out to exit. That was difficult to do when you're in a wheelchair. And so, with one hand was Rick trying to push the door while pushing me, or we were using like the footrests of the wheelchair to just push the doors open. So that was a little bit difficult and awkward and, kind of surprising that was kind of an obstacle.
Yeah, I think we were able to manage it by only feeling a little bit awkward. But if you had something like a broken foot or a cast, you wouldn't have been able to like push those doors open. Or if somebody was taller than you, and that's basically most people. So for us, it was just awkward. But for other people with other disabilities, or especially if you're dealing with something temporary, like a broken foot or something where you couldn't put pressure on that body part, it would be more than just an inconvenience. So, Courtney, thank you so much for joining us on another episode. It's always nice when I can have you here.
I agree. Thank you. So nice to be here.
Courtney will be back on the podcast next week to do a dining review for Storybook Dining with Snow White at Artist Point in Disney's Wilderness Lodge. We will also be joined by Miranda from Pet Alliance of Greater Orlando. She will talk about the good things her organization does for animals in the Orlando area, but she will also talk about her time as an Epcot cast member at the Seas Pavilion. That will be next Thursday on Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Until then, have a great week.